This abnormal condition we experience in abstinence drives some of us so insane that we'll do things that are crazy. My first time in Russia, I was over there doing workshops with a translator, and I had such an amazing experience. During one of the breaks, a guy came up to me and he wants to talk to me, but he doesn't speak English and I don't understand Russian. So we had to use a translator, and it was an Al-Anon translator. They had two translators. One was an alcoholic, one was an Al-Anon. So we used this Al-Anon translator. And so he starts to tell me a story about involving various treatments for alcoholism, and then he got around to the story right before the collapse of the Soviet Union, that their scientists trying to combat this horrific social problem of alcoholism. And it's really bad in Russia. And the scientists developed a chip that they would surgically implant into the muscle tissue in the middle of your back. And if you drank, evidently, the chip would detect the alcohol in your bloodstream and release this toxic substance into your bloodstream that must have been like antabuse. Like, it wasn't designed to kill you, but if you were in bad shape, it could, I suppose. But it would just make you wish you were dead for about 2 days, I guess. It would just make you terribly, terribly sick. And so they would put these chips in people, as a deterrent, so people wouldn't drink. And as he's telling me about that, he turns around, pulls his shirt up, and in the middle of his back, he's got this ugly scar. And then through the translator, he tells me that after a year of having the chip in there with no relief, a year of restless, irritable, and discontent, a year of depression and loneliness, he begged his best friend to take a kitchen knife and cut the chip out of him so he could go get some relief. Now, the Al-Anon translator is horrified by that story. She couldn't believe it. I, on the other hand, was horrified that he waited a year. You know what I'm saying? Like, a year of restless, irritable discontent, low-level depression, loneliness. I mean, wow. Because when I quit drinking, it feels like I'm doing time, and it's horrible eventually. In the chapter more about alcoholism, there's 3 delusions or illusions in the book that we suffer from. And the first 2 Bill talks about in chapter 3. And the first one, it says, the idea that somehow, someday, I will control and enjoy my drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many of us pursue it to the gates of insanity or death. Well, what does that mean? That means that this yearning to recapture the great moments of the past, this yearning to party like I did when I was 18 years old, this fantasy, this hope, and it really is hope. And if you would have told me, Bob, you're dying of hope, that hope was killing me, but it's the hope that somehow, someday, some way I'll control and enjoy my drinking. That I'll be able to turn it back to the good days when partying was amazing and it set me free. And to keep the damage down to something reasonable. And I was obsessed with that. And as long as I had hope that somehow, someday I can do that, I couldn't get all the way in AA. Because what? I don't need to. If my abstinence ever gets uncomfortable enough, I got a back door right out of abstinence. Because I secretly think that under the right circumstances, I can get that ease and comfort, that relief, that feeling of freedom that I'd once gotten when I was younger. And I don't know the truth that it's gone. It's gone. And then the second delusion, it says, the delusion that we are like other people. And since this is a chapter called more about alcoholism, what they're really talking about is people that aren't alcoholic. The delusion that we are like other people, non-alcoholics, or that we presently may be like non-alcoholics, other people, this delusion has to be smashed. And it takes so many of us out. And you'll watch this in AA as I've watched it for years, and it happens everywhere. Guys come into Alcoholics Anonymous, they're beaten half to death by this disease. They've lost almost everything that's dear to them. And their first year of sobriety, they're on fire with AA. Going to meeting every day, maybe two a day, if they can. Got a sponsor, calling up their sponsor. They're afraid to wipe their ass without talking to their sponsor first. You know, they're on it. They're working steps, they're making amends, they're helping others. They got a little beat up car, they got it full of new guys, driving all around. On fire with AA. Sort of like Johnny. Yeah, kind of like Johnny. And then what happens? Well, you start to reap the rewards of a spiritual way of life. And I think it's hard to avoid some modicum or measure of success. And you won't measure it in decimal points. But as your insides get better, your outsides follow along. And so, you know, at 2 years sober, you got a pretty good job. You're making best money you've ever made in your life. You've made a lot of your amends, so you're not on the outs with people. They're starting to love and respect you again. You're welcome at home. You're welcome to your family. You're welcome with some of your old friends. You're getting a good reputation. And it's like it's so easy to be seduced by the very fruits of your own recovery into a false sense of okayness. It's a feeling like I'm all right now. I mean, and if somebody'd ask you, you'd admit you're alcoholic. Oh no, I'm still alcoholic, absolutely. But a funny thing starts happening. You don't act as alcoholic as you were when you were going to 10 meetings a week. You're going to 3 now because you're busy. You have a sponsor, but you don't really ask him for help, direction. You go through stuff and you call him up after you go through it to tell him what you did in case he needs that information, You've become unsponsorable. You don't even know it, but you're at the helm of your own ship again. The same position that always destroyed you with good intentions. And gradually, incrementally, you start diminishing because you feel good. You start diminishing your involvement in your own recovery. And the problem with alcoholism is it's unforgiving, and it's patient, and it doesn't care. And I've watched people say things. I've tried to have conversation with people who stop doing AA, stop going to meetings, stop being sponsored, stop helping others. They stop the whole thing. And I'd say, you can't do that. Well, you don't understand. I got 3 kids, and I'm a single parent with 3 kids, and I got a business, and I got a house to take care of, and you don't understand. I said, yeah, no, I understand. But I'll tell you something. Alcoholism doesn't give a crap about your kids. Alcoholism doesn't give a crap about your house and your business. No more than diabetes does, or heart disease. And it demands treatment. And they're surprised when they drink again. They're surprised. I'm not. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently maybe, has to be smashed. I tell you, it's a lot easier having chronic alcoholism once you accept it. What's really hard is to have chronic alcoholism and argue with the reality of it. It's painful, because you'll never put all your chips in the pot. And Wilson talks about who gets better and who doesn't. He says in chapter 5, it's read in most meetings, it says those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. And then there's a period there. It doesn't say completely give themselves to this simple program for the first 90 days. Because if it did say that, that would mean that you didn't have alcoholism yet. Alcohol was them, right? You'd be over. The idea that I could I'm going to do a whole lot of AA, and then I'm just going to be able to coast for a while. Rest on my laurels, as it says later in the book. And these delusions are brutal. The first one kept me from getting all the way into AA. And the second one is what, even once I want to be all the way in, it won't keep me. I won't stay in, because I want to get over this thing called alcoholism. I want to work the steps in such perfection that I glow in the dark. That I don't have to go to meetings anymore, and I don't really need a sponsor. I'll have a couple sponsors that'll call me for advice. And, people will walk around saying, "Oh, I touched the hem of his garment," that kind of. You can't do enough AA to not have alcoholism. You can't do enough AA to not have alcoholism. And yet, contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition, I live a pretty good life. There are days that I'm not even conscious that I have alcoholism. There's days when if you said to me, "Bob, when's the last time you suffered from alcoholism?" I'd have to think about it. I'd have to go, well, it's been a little while. That's because I take actions every day, every single day. I have a sponsor who doesn't care anything about how I feel. And I have sponsees who I care very much how they're doing, but I don't care how they feel. I care what they're doing. And I encourage them to take the actions of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a home group. And everyone that's a member of my home group knows that I'm a member of that group by my actions, because I got jobs there. I got commitments. My sponsor knows he's my sponsor by my actions. I call him at least once a week, maybe more. And let me tell you something. If your sponsor is not sure he's your sponsor, he's not. I got guys like that. I got one guy, I just saw him. I hadn't seen him in 3 years. Tells everybody I'm his sponsor. I said, I haven't talked to you in 3 years, for God's sake. Well, I listened to your talks online. I thought, what the hell's that about? Stop it. What do you got, virtual sobriety? I mean, maybe you'll find a virtual bottle. We're delusional easy. So these things prevent guys like me from putting all my chips in the pot here. Completely to surrender to this program. In the back, towards the end of the book on page 152, in A Vision for You, it talks about a transition that I think captures this thing called bottom, which I was delusional about. I thought it had to do with consequences of my drinking. And it's easy to believe that, because you go to meetings and you'll hear these stories. You hear story after story of people who they got worse and worse and worse, and so bad they were going to kill themselves, and then, they got sober. As if my sobriety and my involvement in AA had to be preceded by horrific consequences. That's not my story. My last drunk was not my worst one. If it was going to be preceded by horrific consequences, I had some earlier drunks that were just awful, that should have catapulted me into the middle of AA, but they didn't. Because it's what it talks about here. It says, it's talking about guys that are sober for a little while. It says, we are like a boy whistling in the dark to keep up his spirits. Inwardly, we would give anything to take a half dozen drinks and get away with them. I will presently try that old game again, for I'm not really happy about my sobriety. Not really. I feel like I'm doing time. I cannot picture life without alcohol. And that's years of my relapsing were just like that. And to me, in those years, AA had good news and bad news. The good news is that maybe if I went to thousands of these stupid meetings, I'd stay sober the rest of my life. And the bad news is I'm going to live a long time. Because I can't imagine life without it, or without something. I got a big secret, and the big secret is without something, I'm nothing. I can't imagine life without it. And then it says, this is exactly what happened to me. Someday, and it came, someday he will be unable to imagine life either with alcohol or without it. Then he will know loneliness such as few do who be at the jumping off place, and a wish for the end. Right before I got sober, I was in a halfway house, and I had this terrible experience. I was sober, and I was sober several months, and I was depressed. I was restless, irritable, discontent. The loneliness was horrible, and I just hate my life. And I feel like I'm doing time, and I went on a drunk, and I met some people, and they took me, I went to this bar, and I hadn't drank yet, and I was gonna start in this bar, and it was a great bar. And I got these double shots of 100 proof whiskey, and I'm throwing them down because I'm desperate to jumpstart some kind of party, because I have been sober all these months, and I tell you, I've been a very good sport up to now, but this is just too much. And I am just up to here with being sober. And I'm lonely, and I want to get free so I can maybe talk to some of these girls and have some laughs with some of the guys and shoot some pool and throw down that first double shot. And if you've ever been dry for a period of time, the first drink always tastes like hope. And I'm waiting for that thing to happen so I can come out and play, so I can mix it up with these people that I see that are having fun. And it don't jumpstart. So I'm desperate. I throw down another one. I order another pair. And I start sinking into a depression. And I'll never forget this. Before I got really rummied up, I'm sitting there and I'm almost starting to cry because I'm drinking frantically, trying to get a good feeling again, and I ain't getting it. And I'm looking at all the people in the bar that are having fun, and I remember sitting there thinking, what's wrong with me? Because I could remember when I was the life of the party. I could remember when alcohol set me free and I could come out and play and I was connected and I could join in, and I remembered that. But I couldn't get it anymore. And it was like this window opens and I could see a bitter, bitter truth. The bitter truth was, Bob, this is as good as it ever gets for you, is this depressive, lonely, pathetic drinking. And that knowledge drove me to try to take my own life that later on. Because I couldn't imagine life with it anymore. Not the way it had become. It became pathetic, and I can't imagine life without it either. I am in a trap I cannot spring. It's a dilemma. When there appears to be only two paths, and both of them are horrific. Drinking like I'm drinking, and this pathetic drinking, or sober like I get sober with that pathetic sober. I can't imagine either course. Now, some of you are sitting there saying, "Oh, Bob, what about AA?" AA doesn't look like it'll work. And it eventually brought me to a point where I tried to take my own life, and which as a result of that failure at suicide, it put me in my last detox, where I met my sponsor and I asked him to help me. And I'll never forget this. I was not sponsorable. What was killing me, and I don't understand this, is this ego. It was killing me. I fit the old adage, you can always tell an alcoholic, you just can't tell him much, right? I had a great psychiatrist one time, nailed me, but I thought he was stupid. He said to me, guys like you don't get better. He said, you may find a way to stay, some of you find a way to stay abstinent for decades, but you never get better. Because even though you have no self-esteem, your ego, you're so ego-dominated that you cannot listen to anyone in order to hear anything new. You can only listen to see how you are already right. And I thought, he's stupid. And it was one of the most accurate diagnoses I ever got from a psychiatrist. It was my ego that was killing me, and I don't know it. Because I don't know about you guys, it works through my thinking. How you talk to yourself in your head, that's the voice of the enemy. That's the devil is the negotiator in your head. This is crazy, do you ever notice how the voice in your head it's a lot more reasonable than your sponsor's voice, isn't it? Just the way it just talks to you, it understands it. It's really on your side, not like those people in AA that just want to be wet blankets and curtail your fun. This is a good voice. This is a voice that says things like, your sponsor said to stay away from the new girls, but he probably wants them for himself. It's that voice. It's the voice that notices what's wrong with people. It's the voice that says, you waved to him across the room, he didn't wave back. He never did like you, did he? It's that voice. It's the voice that tells you that you need to quit your job because they're disrespecting you. It's the voice that reminds you of your rights. It's the voice of entitlement. It's the voice of judgment and opinion. It's the voice of the ego. It's the enemy. And yet, how often we are run by that voice. One of the greatest tricks the ego has ever done is to convince me it doesn't exist, or to convince me that it is me. I think that early sobriety, I was having a nervous breakdown, because I just get in my head and all these problems, most of them haven't existed, don't occur yet, but I can see them coming, and they're all just like making me nuts. I'm having a nervous breakdown with fear and anxiety. And I told some guy, this old timer, I started dumping them all out, and there was a lot of stuff I was worried about. None of it had occurred yet, but I was worried about a lot of stuff. And he said to me, he said, you think that you are your mind, don't you? You think you're your head. I said, yeah, it's my mind, my thoughts, yeah. He said, that's not you. No? He said, no, you're the idiot that listens to you. Yeah. And I don't know about you guys, my ego is very concerned with being right. It doesn't care if I'm sleepless. It doesn't care if I'm jobless, if I'm friendless. It doesn't even care if it kills me, as long as after I'm dead, everybody's going, oh yeah, but Bob was right. So, if you're surrender resistant, which means that you don't want to follow any directions that aren't your idea, or that you don't feel like doing, which is insane, because none of us come to AA and feel like doing AA. I mean, nobody does. I mean, who comes in here and goes, oh, I get to write an inventory? Oh my God, I've hit the jackpot. Oh, this is amazing. Oh, I get to spend 10 years of my sobriety paying back the money. Oh, I love this program. And then to boot, I have to give up all the pleasure in life and put it aside to go help disgusting people who can't even stay sober. Oh, this is amazing. This is wonderful. Nobody comes here and looks at AA like that. And yet after you do it for a while, you go, man, this is wonderful. This is really cool. So how do you get in the middle of AA when you can't get in the middle of AA? What happens to you? I heard Chuck Chamberlain. I was about a month. My first time I ever heard him, I was probably a month sober. And Chuck said something that really got to me. I couldn't understand. I was too new to understand a lot of Chamberlain at that time. As years went on, he became more and more clear to me. But when I was new, I heard one thing, and he said that he'd been surrendered by the bottle. And I thought, maybe that's what happened to me, because something was different. For the first time in over 6 years of being around AA, 6 years, I went to my first meeting. I wasn't old enough to take a legal drink. And after all those years, it was the first time I ever got a sponsor. And I said to the man, because I was afraid he was going to turn me down, I said, if you'll sponsor me, I'll do anything you ask me to do. And evidently I must have meant that, because when he started asking me to do some things that were frightening, like turn myself into the courts on the other side of the country and offer to go back and do 2 years in prison, I followed his directions against everything that I felt. And a lot of other things he got me to do that I wouldn't have done. I didn't feel like doing them. I didn't want to do them. I was scared to do them, but I did them. And that really is surrender. And when Chuck said I was surrendered by the bottle, that's what surrender looks like, I think. You know, when you watch a war movie and you see a guy surrender, what's he do? He throws down all his means of defending himself and protecting himself and doing for himself. He gets rid of his knives, his guns, his hand grenades, his rifle, and he just sits there and he waits for somebody to tell him what to do. That is the essence of surrender. When you give up your way to follow someone else's. And that is the essence of surrender. And that's, I guess, unbeknownst to me, that's what had happened to me in 1978. And I had this counselor when I was in the detox. Her name was Judy Harris. She just passed away with almost 50 years of sobriety recently. And Judy had done a case history on me, and plus I'd signed papers for her to collect and get sent all the stuff from all the other treatment centers I was in, and some of the psychiatrists. So Judy knew everything about me. She knew about my years of treatment centers, my psychiatric stuff. She knew I worked in the field for a while. She knew about the relapse after relapse after relapse. She knew the whole story, more than anybody, really. And I'm 3 months sober, and I'm at my home group, which is on a Friday night, and at that time, and Judy came to the meeting. She was a member of AA. She didn't go a lot, but she came to that particular meeting, and she came up to me and she said to me, she said, Bob, what happened to you? I don't know what she means. I said, what do you mean, Judy? She says, well, something's happened to you. What happened to you? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, every time I'm leaving the detox, you're one of the guys bringing the meetings in there. I said, yeah, I do that with a bunch of guys a couple times a week. She said, I heard you got Dick Tucson as a sponsor and you're calling him a lot. I said, I call him every day. She said, I heard you turned yourself into the courts and offered to go back there. And I said, I did. And I didn't have to do the 2 years. They transferred my case out here. Just in a few more months, I'll be free of the whole thing. It's amazing. She said, I heard you started to make amends to your parents. Yeah, it's not going that well, but I'm taking the action. She said, I heard you signed up for the meetings at the state penitentiary. I said, I did. She said, I heard you're secretary of a rush hour meeting. one day a week. I said, yeah, I am. I wasn't supposed to be. You're supposed to be 6 months, but I don't know, they voted me in anyway. I told them I'm not 6 months. They said, that's all right. They voted me in anyway. She said, I heard you were praying. I was embarrassed. I said, well, yeah. I said, I don't know if I believe in God or not, but I'm going through the motions. And then she said, what happened to you? You never did any of that before. All you would do is not drink and go to a few meetings. What happened to you that pushed you in the middle of all this stuff? And it baffled me because I didn't know. I thought, wow, what happened to me? Because my last drunk was not my worst drunk by any means. And I thought, what happened to me? And I went home that night, I'm chewing on that, just thinking, what did happen to me? Right after that, a guy in AA came up to me after a meeting, and he said, I need you to help me out with something. He took me out to his car, and in the trunk he had all these beautiful clothes, sport jackets and shirts, and they all just came from the dry cleaners. And he said, my wife's on my back to get rid of this stuff to make room in the closet. You'd really help me out by taking it. I found out later that wasn't true. He just knew that would be the only way to take it. He had to make it look like I was helping him, right? And I took all this stuff, and they had a box of books in there, novels, not self-help books, not recovery books, not spiritual books, just like science fiction, mysteries, that kind of thing. And he said, you like to read? I said, yeah, I do. Would you like these? I said, absolutely. I looked at some of the titles. They looked really kind of cool. And I started reading one of the books in that box, and there was a part in the story where they did a little sidebar where they started talking about these scientists that were doing experiments on the human brain. And they discovered in the human brain was a part, it had a Latin name, but they kept calling it the pleasure center. It's the part of the brain that allows you to experience the euphoria of when you drink or even do drugs. It's where you get high. So the scientists took these laboratory rats and they put two tiny wire filaments into the pleasure center of the rat's brain, and they would pass a mild electric current through those wires. It would stimulate the pleasure center, and the rat would get euphorically loaded and high. So they hooked up the juice to a pedal in the rat's cage, and the rat would learn he could hit that pedal and get high. So the rat just lays on the pedal. I mean, he doesn't sleep anymore. He doesn't eat. He doesn't drink water. He doesn't have sex. He's too busy partying to have sex. He doesn't do anything anymore. He just lays on the pedal, and then what happens is eventually he dies. Usually a combination, his heart seizes up from a combination of exhaustion and dehydration. And the scientists realized these rats were dying like this. So being somewhat humane, they hooked up a bunch of sensors to the rats that would allow them to know when the rat was in danger. So these poor rats are hitting this pedal, and they're having a great time hitting the pedal, hitting the pedal, hitting the pedal. And then they get in the danger zone, and the scientists turn the juice off. Now the poor rat's hitting the pedal, only nothing happens. And he hits it again, and nothing happens, and again, and again. And after many, many futile attempts to jumpstart that party, that rat finally, once and for all, gets it that it's over. And instead of being able to go back to being a rat, the rat curls up in a ball and lays on the floor of the cage to die, because without the juice, what the hell's the point? Right? And I'm reading that and I'm thinking, my God, that's exactly what happened to me. It wasn't the consequences of my drinking that thrust me into the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous and surrendered me. I'll roll with those. As long as I can get drunk, as long as I get a little bit of relief, I'll roll with all that stuff. I'll put up with it. What brought me right to my knees in a point of surrender here was that alcohol no longer worked. I was in a trap I could not spring. Abstinence was just too hard for me emotionally. And drunkenness was too pathetic. And there's nowhere to go. except either die or go into Alcoholics Anonymous. And Wilson in our book says that we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, or the other is to accept spiritual help. And I think most of us would choose the blotting us out to the bitter end, except that one of the most horrible things about alcoholism is that you're forced to get intermittently sober, right? Because you can't drink 24/7 for that long. I mean, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks, couple weeks, maybe. If I could have blotted myself out until it eventually just died, passed out somewhere, I would have done it. But the hardest thing is whether I wanted to or not, I'd get to those points where it wouldn't stay down anymore. And I'm afraid of going into seizures, and I'm sick. And I'd be forced into a state of abstinence that was unbearable, to return to the unbearable state of drunkenness that's pathetic. And back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. Till I tried to kill myself. On page 44, to get back to the rat. Yeah. What Alcoholics Anonymous is designed to do, it's not designed to get you to quit drinking, truly. Matter of fact, there's not one place in the book that tells you to better quit. You better stop. There should be a chapter into quitting. There's not. Matter of fact, it says the opposite. It says the most powerful desire to not drink is of no avail. It says lack of power is your dilemma. It says there comes a time when you have no mental defense against the first drink. It kind of tells you can't. You want to, you need to, you should, but you can't. You are powerless. Alcoholics Anonymous is not about getting us to quit drinking. It's about one thing. It's designed to do slowly what alcohol in the early days of drinking did quickly. It's designed to turn the juice back on. It's designed to set my spirit free in a way that 5 shots of tequila did when 5 shots of tequila changed the universe. It's designed to set me free. And you know something? If Alcoholics Anonymous did not provide that freedom for me, I couldn't stay here. I know there's some tough members of AA that can just not drink for decades. And I'm sober, and you're stupid. And they're angry and depressed. And oh my God, if alcoholism had a hierarchy, they would be the John Waynes of alcoholism. I'm more like the Pee Wee Herman or the Laurel and Hardy of alcoholism. As soon as my emotions start putting the screws to me, man, I cave. I had to have a spiritual solution because I can't endure the pain of extreme anxiety to the point of panic and extreme depression to the point of suicidal thoughts. I can't endure that for long periods of time. If Alcoholics Anonymous didn't work for a guy like me, I couldn't survive myself here. And that's really the problem. It's Alcoholics Anonymous gets guys like me to do something we can't imagine. We survive ourselves here through a program that, as we're going to take a break and we'll come back and start implementing this program of self-abandonment that sets us free.